On the 22nd of February 1511, tragedy hit the English royal family and Henry VIII and his queen, the Catherine of Aragon. At this point in history, the king, despite having a number of mistresses, was rather happy with the first of his 6 wives, and he hoped that the pair would have a son and a child who would then go on to rule over England. At the time, it was standard for a king to want a male heir, and with this, Henry's quest for this would plunge him down a dark path of divorce, religious turmoil, and execution. But Henry VIII did have a son born to him alive with his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. But at just a few months old, this child had a tragic demise. But what is the story of Henry, the Duke of Cornwall, and what specifically did the young child succumb to inside of the royal nursery? Let's try to piece together this forgotten Tudor story. Henry the Duke of Cornwall was born on the 1st of January 1511 inside of Richmond Palace. His mother, Catherine of Aragon, had gone into her confinement inside of the palace weeks before, and she was attended on by her ladies and midwives, and the child born was called Henry after his father, the king, and also his grandfather, Henry VII. But this was the first live child born of King Henry VIII and Catherine, and he was born 18 months after their wedding. Catherine had given birth to a stillborn daughter previously in the January before, but there was a huge amount of celebration. In the eyes of Henry VIII and his wife, this child was the heir and successor to the throne who would rule England for many years after Henry's death. And there was a huge amount of hope for him as well as celebration. Henry was christened 4 days after his birth, and beacons were lit all over England for his arrival and birth. Many royal families sent expensive gifts to celebrate the birth, including Louis XII of France, who gifted a gold salt holder and a cup. His godmother was Margaret of Austria, the Duchess of Savoy, and there was a lot of celebration even in Europe. At this time, King Henry VIII was not a king who was necessarily angering these people across of Europe and the world, and neither was he considered too offensive of a monarch or a tyrant. Many other European rulers actually liked him, but this would change as the years rolled on. A huge tournament was held for the young prince's honour, and Henry VIII and Catherine held the huge celebration for the birth of their son, and this tournament was said to have been the most lavish of the whole of Henry's reign. It saw knights take to the battlefield and much decoration, especially ordered, and huge banquets followed. This took place on the 12th and 13th of February 1511, and it occurred in Westminster, near to where today Westminster Abbey's north door can be found. The whole tournament in honour of Henry's first son cost a staggering £4,500, which would be millions in today's money. There were other events such as pageants and masques, and in aid of the Prince Henry, who inherited the title of the Duke of Cornwall, as is the heir at birth. And even on one of the tilt yards a lion was brought out before the jousting took place. Across England there was a lot of revelry for the king and his queen, but as mentioned, at just 52 days old, tragedy struck. Inside of the royal nursery, Henry the Duke of Cornwall was being cared for by midwives as well as other members of staff who made sure he was well protected and also raised well. However, on the 22nd of February 1511, Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon were informed that their 52-day-old son had died inside of the royal nursery in Richmond Palace. The baby was given a prince's funeral, and Henry VIII and Catherine were in a lot of shock, and they did not attend as was traditional, and instead sent courtiers to act on their behalf. The body of the Duke of Cornwall was placed inside of a small coffin, and was then carried from Richmond Palace on the Thames on black barges, and the body of the tiny prince then arrived inside of Westminster Abbey. But what killed the young boy? What is incredibly tragic about the Tudor period and the 16th century is that this sort of thing was too common. Medical knowledge and understanding regarding childbirth was not the greatest, and many women knew the risks of having a child could result in death of either mother or child, or both. But Henry, the Duke of Cornwall, survived his birth, and Catherine of Aragon recovered well. He died from something he contracted weeks after birth, leading to the conclusion that he became ill from some condition that made its way into the royal nursery, or whether he died from some condition that he was born with. One possibility is that the child died from what is today known as sudden infant death syndrome, which is still tragically causing too many deaths each year. This was a condition that plagued the Tudor period, and around half of all children born at this time would not make it past their 5th birthday. But he also may have been taken ill beforehand, and this may have not been reported outside of royal circles. Many ambassadors wrote of the arrival of the baby, but none mentioned an illness inside of the royal nursery. As the king and queen also held the tournament 10 days before his death, it's likely that Henry the Duke of Cornwall at this time was strong, and that he was getting on well and developing as normal, but this leads to the conclusion that his death occurred within a matter of days or even hours, and that the nature of it gave the king and queen no time to prepare. With this, it leads to either sudden infant death syndrome, as mentioned, or a serious disease that took the young boy quickly. And as no symptoms of his death are reported, we must consider that this was the most probable cause of his death. The funeral of the young prince and heir was huge and massive, and as mentioned, Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon did not turn up. He was buried inside of Westminster Abbey, and the ceremony had hundreds of people involved in it, and the procession was also large. Inside of Westminster Abbey, the remains of the Duke of Cornwall were received by the monks who took his body into the sanctuary area of the abbey, near to the entrance of the chapel of St. Edward the Confessor. It was buried in an unmarked grave and plot. One of the biggest tragedies of the death of Henry VIII's first son was that his father would embark on this quest for a number of years to have another son, and this would lead him to divorce, execution, and the torture that led many people suffering across the nation. Henry VIII would of course get his male heir and son with the birth of Edward VI to his third wife, Jane Seymour. But she tragically also died shortly after giving birth, showing the dangers of childbirth at the time. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.